What are cybercriminals doing? How do they work? How do they operate? We're going to be finding out whether there is honor amongst thieves.
I see the name hacker differently than what the media would see the name hacker, right? Because it's not necessarily always bad or malicious.
And we've seen that evolution over time from where it was, and now it's turned into a full-blown industry.
This is also one of the reasons why we see this massive increase in cybercrime, right?
And I was just sat there thinking, Jesus Christ, this is why I need to get into security, because just watching how this works.
They would make actually really good pen testers or really good blue teamers, but obviously they have chosen the dark path.
Let's face it, once you have shadow AI, for instance, that's going to compound the ability of a lot of people who are talented anyway. They like to keep some of the less good hackers or less good malicious actors around as scapegoats.
There's also the lone wolves, also these individuals who are just very, very talented and go on the dark side and basically pull all this stuff off themselves.
They spend more on securing themselves than organizations on the legitimate side spend securing themselves.
Yeah. It's never been as easy to develop malicious code and attacks as it is today.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Razorwire. Today, we're going to be talking once more about cybercriminals in my new ominous lighting system, which evidently I haven't quite figured out yet. No, today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be finding out whether there is honor amongst thieves. What are cybercriminals doing? How do they work? How do they operate? What kind of connotations do they have with regards to themselves, how they scapegoat people, whether there's rivalries between them, whether there is, wider relationships with other criminal groups? We're going to be exploring all of that today. So today, in order to discuss the wonderful world of the darker side of information security or cybersecurity, we're going to talk about the bad guys. We're going to talk about who they are, what they do, why there is no honor amongst thieves. Let's get into it right now. I have Martin Voelk. Martin, do you want to introduce yourself to the people out there? Who you
Absolutely.
are, what you do, and why are you here talking about the bad guys with me?
Hello, Jim. It's good to be on the show again. So my name is Martin Voelk. I'm a cybersecurity expert. I've been in InfoSec since 1997, quite a long time. I started out in networking first. And by the mid-2000s, I started getting on the offensive side of the house, and more specifically penetration testing and ethical hacking. And later on, I moved into application security, APIs, web apps, mobile apps, and more recently, AI systems. So I like to be on the offensive side of security. And so I could say I'm an ethical hacker, right? So I'm one of the good guys who does it for a good purpose, but probably uses the same techniques what the bad guys are using. That's me in a nutshell.
Absolutely, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you back. One of the most popular kind of sets of podcasts we do, there's a couple of different topics that we do. One of them that seems to be one of the most popular is understanding the kind of mindset of the bad guys. And as Martin said, when you've been in this game for any length of time, you get to learn. We've got a bit more benefits than they have when it comes to the fact that we were there kind of pretty much right at the beginning 30 odd years ago when it was a little bit different, a little bit more blatant. And we've seen that evolution over time from where it was just a group of people who were doing it for shits and giggles half of the time. And now it's turned into a full-blown industry. They run it like corporations now. I mean, anybody who's looked at the Conti files or any of the kind of leaks that have happened from some of these hacker groups, you get a real kind of keen insight into how they operate. And let's go into that over the course of this particular podcast. And I think, let's go way back, Martin, even before possibly we were in InfoSec, The term hacker was never actually derogatory, was it? Back in the early days?
No, I mean, not really. So, still to this time or to this point, there's a lot of people who say like hacker is not a bad term. A lot of people who are actually doing security research, they call themselves hackers, right? And a hacker, in their definition, is just someone who like challenges the machine. Okay, so in order to actually try to break it, first of all, understand it in depth. I think that's the essence of hacking in general. What is hacking? Like, let's define this first, right? Like, hacking is basically encountering flaws in a system, and as a human, you try to bypass certain controls which are built into a system. That's effectively hacking. And a lot of the good guys, security researchers and so-called white hats, they call themselves hackers. So I think that the term hacking really comes with like it has a very negative reputation in the market or in the industry. A hacker, oh, that's the bad guy sitting there uh, and hacking around in the basement and stuff like that. It only becomes malicious when it's done for criminal activity. I like to take the analogy of the Chaos Computer Club in Germany. And so these guys are kind of like an advocate group, and they exist until today, and they run their yearly events and things like this. But it all started out with taking a technology and finding the risks and vulnerabilities in that technology, and then publishing that and saying like, look, the government wants to do XYZ, or they want to introduce this new system, but it has serious flaws and it's vulnerable to certain attacks. This is also hacking, but this is kind of white hat hacking, right? Like find vulnerabilities. This links into the bug bounty area, right? Like where hackers are actually hacking systems or applications, and then they get paid legitimately by these companies for encountering those kind of things.
Yeah.
I think so. The name hacker, I see the name hacker differently than what the media would see the name hacker, right? Like, because it's not necessarily always bad or malicious.
Absolutely. And I mean, back in the day, in the dark annals of time where technology was a much simpler thing, you know, you used to get people who were called hackers who would be doing things to try to get technology to operate in ways that it shouldn't necessarily do, but not necessarily maliciously, just to kind of see how far they could stretch the boundaries of, you know, what is possible. It's not really any different from kind of, as you quite rightly point out, researchers and stuff like that. And then to be totally honest, if we didn't have that first round of hackers back in the sort of like, you know, 80s, 90s, and so on and so forth, you wouldn't have half the technology we have today. You wouldn't have that interest from people. And I think over time, it's become not only synonymous with kind of like the malicious actors, but it's also become quite a sexy title, really. I mean, it's cool to go into a pub and somebody says, oh, what do you do? Oh, I'm a hacker by trade. Really? You say to people you're a penetration tester and they kind of giggle because they get this vision of something completely different. Whereas when you say you're a hacker, people kind of go, oh, wow, that sounds cool. You know, what do you do? And I think it's interesting, the history behind it. I mean, you got old Mitnick, who, you know, purportedly started a lot of this with the old Captain Crunch whistle from the serial to kind of bypass the restrictions on, what was it? It was phone networks, wasn't it?
He was getting freaking,
you know. Okay, yes. I wouldn't say necessarily what he did back in the day was legal, but it was interesting. And, you know, just using a simple whistle from a kid's bloody serial, it could completely bypass the security on a phone network and give you free calls.
Yeah.
Nowadays, we've got a whole kind of different ball game when it comes to the malicious guys. And as I said, you know, you don't operate long in this industry for as long as we have without either coming across them or encountering them, sometimes directly when there's a breach, sometimes indirectly when, you know, you hear about some of what they do and you kind of get to know their online handles, as we used to term it back in the day. You know, you can kind of fingerprint who they are. You won't necessarily know who they are. And then you get the unfortunate side where there have been a few security people who've crossed either over to the dark side or they started on the dark side and decided to come over and do something a little bit more legal. Again, Kevin Mitnick was one of those guys. For many, many years, he went and did the bad stuff. And then once he'd done that and got caught, he kind of crossed over. And I think it's a really rich history of that term of hacker. And I think it's good for anybody getting into this industry to really kind of do your research on really what that term is and where it comes from and what the origins were behind it. Because if you do that, you can kind of see where we've been and where we're going to. Because once you kind of get into the mindset of what these people on the malicious side specifically are looking to do, or the types of groups that you have, then you can kind of predict what their targets are. And if you're on the defensive side, like I am, like you are, technically speaking, although you're more of the testing side, you can kind of predict where they're going with it, and you can kind of head them off at the pass. Is that fair to say, do you think?
I would say this is totally fair. Yeah, that's a good statement.
First and foremost, let's go over the kind of groups that are out there today, and then we'll kind of go into a little bit more about them. I think in many respects, you've got the kind of fundamentalist types. They're a little bit rarer than the others, but they're the ones who are kind of doing what they do for fundamentalist reasons. They are institutions they don't like, various other sort of like legitimate governments or whatever who are doing stuff that they don't like doing, and these individuals will go in and cause mischief, break systems, that kind of thing. Then you have the ones who are for profit. That's the predominant ones, I think, out there in the big wide world. They want to earn money, and they want to earn money any way they can, as quickly as they can, efficiently as they can. Then you have the kind of nation-state sponsored groups who, are they legitimate? Are they not? They're not necessarily legitimate, although they're funded by a group. So they could sort of deny responsibility, I think, is probably the best way. Are those the ones that that you've come across? Is there any that I've missed?
No, I think that sums it up. So it's basically three types. I will group them in three types. It's the hacktivism group, what you just mentioned. Mm-hmm. This shades a bit into gray, right? Like, so it's not necessarily all malicious. Like, there's a lot of activism as well for people who are going to expose, for example, certain regimes, right? So even though they might use illegal tactics, but they're doing it for a good cause. Like if you're exposing certain dictatorships or leak data about human rights abuse or whatever, right? Like those kind of guys. It depends from where you see it, right? Like this is, I think this is another discussion point we should have later on, maybe. So then you have the money-driven ones, like whether that's ransomware, whether that's stealing credit card information, like the whole carding industry, the whole, a lot of the activities which happen on the darknet, on the Tor network and things like this. You always obviously have those people. That links into organized crime, right? Like, so there is interlinks, like there is obviously the cyber aspect to it, but there's also like the physical goods associated with it. Like, when it comes to carding, like if numbers are being stolen and things like this, they're on the dark web. There you can buy like shimming devices and cloning devices and things like this. So that's hardware associated with it, which again is not malicious by itself, right? But it's being used for malicious purposes. And then you have the state actors, and that's across the world, I would say. There is more active ones than others. The West is doing it. The East is doing it. Small countries are doing it. Everyone or most countries have some sort of like cyber army, I would call it, right? Which even if it's just for intelligence, and if it's not for denial of service, or if it's not like for actual destruction, but intelligence gathering with illegal means, that falls into this. Those are pretty much the three groups out there. And I always say I don't like blaming. It's a funny discussion to have when you think about, like, is it hacking when the US government or the British government is infiltrating another country's IT system? Like, technically it is hacking and technically it is malicious, right? But we only see it the way it is when China is doing this. When China is attacking us, oh, it's the Chinese hackers, right? And oh, it's the North Korean hackers, or la la la. But aren't we doing the same thing? Like, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. And you do hear the propaganda, and I don't know. It's a bit of a shame. I'm gonna pull back a tad before we go into this one. It's like you go back 15, 20 years, and organized crime really didn't care much about cybercrime. Really, cybercrime was there, and I mean, there's places online, for instance, where you can go and you can find out about Dread Pirate Roberts. You can find out about various other kind of well-known old school hackers who would, as you say, they would get credit card information. They would either clone the cards or they would buy loads and loads of stuff and get it delivered somewhere so they could then sort of resell it on, and so on and so forth. And it was very small scale at one point. Although, interesting fact, I used to work for a reinsurance firm in bank, as when I was kind of more IT than I was security. I was in security, but it was at a time where most security people were part of an IT department. And every now and then, like you do in IT, as I'm sure you had to back in the day as well, you'd get some idiot that would decide there'd be an office move, and you'd have to go in for an entire weekend and give up a weekend where you'd go in, move stuff around, check cables, redo everything. And it was always a nightmare. And if you were lucky, the company would let you sort of go down the pub at the end of a Saturday or whatever after a hard day's grubbing around on the floor and getting dirty. Now, the reinsurance firm that I worked for had their main office in Bank in London. Now, during the week in Bank, it's stuffed full of people. There was, at the time anyway, we're talking 20 years ago, people all over the place going to various different businesses. Weekends, however, it was like a ghost town. It's a financial district. Nobody's there at the weekends other than some other IT people and a few cabbies going through. Even the cabs aren't really there. And I remember I used to see the carders before CCTV got really, really big, and they'd be there with bags and bags of credit cards, putting them into the ATMs, and would be sort of drawing out as much as they could with each card. And if one didn't work, they'd sling it in the bag. And I'd watch. I sat there with a sandwich once on a bench watching this guy doing this for like 45 minutes to this one ATM, and before he shifted off down, and then he walked a little way down. Obviously, it's banks. So there's a lot of banks there with a lot of ATMs. And off he toddled down with his big case and started doing the same thing again. And I was just sat there thinking, Jesus Christ, this is why I need to get into security, because just watching how this works. But, when we got the Conti files, we actually saw that it's now run like a legitimate business. You have an HR department who does the recruitment and the vetting. You have development departments who kind of just do the development side, and there's a lot more ransomware as a service and cybercrime as a service functions now. It kind of mirrors what we have in the real world, but on the dark web and all the rest of it. And this is where the podcast name comes. No honor amongst thieves. You have the youngsters who either show promise and end up becoming part of the wider group in whatever capacity they're in. But I have heard, and I'd be interested to see what you hear, that they like to keep some of the less good hackers or less good malicious actors around as scapegoats, just in case it looks like they're about to get caught. Because let's face it, you hear about, in the UK, so-and-so got caught for the big shop that will remain nameless that got hacked recently, and it was two 20-year-olds from sort of East London or Manchester or wherever it was. And it's like, people say, they've been caught. No, they haven't.
Totally.
Those are two sacrificial lambs, because, malicious actors are not idiots.
Totally. No, I fully agree. And I mean, I've done my own research into this topic for years. Mainly because I'm interested as well, and I 100% agree what you just said. So those are the ones, this is organized, as you described. This is organized. There's a chain of command, and those are the scapegoats. Like, for example, the ones cashing out, which is one of the most risky tasks in an operation like this. It's also those people, who get other people to let them use their bank account for drops. It's so-called drops. and then it's like story building and social engineering and all these things. But those guys who are at the bottom of the food chain, so to speak, those are the ones which are completely expendable, right? And the smart people, and this is interesting because you mentioned UK, and I have no doubt there is like really good hackers in the UK, for example. But what you see is that the brains or the really good ransom operators, they operate out of jurisdictions where the West has no chance to get in, right? Like whether that's certain ex-Soviet Union republics, whether that's countries in Asia, but also in Latin America, there's a lot of spots where people can hack without impunity. So they can just sit there and hack. They don't have to worry that the FBI is going to knock on their door or that any local federal police comes, because once again, they are intermingled with other organized crime groups or sometimes with the government. And what I mean here is that's not the state-sponsored kind of thing, but it's more like a corruption game, right? Like, so you can do your hacking here in, like, let's take a country like in Asia, for example. You can hack here as you please, but you pay some of the profit to us, like to the local governor or to the local police officer and things like this. And this makes it extremely difficult for Western services or Western countries to actually get a grip on this, right? Because it's a globalized world. And to participate in this, all you need is internet access, basically, right? And those people, like some of them are really sophisticated, and they would make actually really good pen testers or really good, like blue teamers. But obviously, they have chosen the dark path and work on the other side of the fence. But those ones are the ones rarely getting called, right? And you can go to the FBI website, for example, right now, and I think they even have these cyber wanted lists and stuff.
Yeah, I've seen that.
A lot of them are in Russia, right? And they probably drive around with Ferraris and things like that. And yeah, they cannot leave the country, or they cannot go to the European Union, or they cannot go to the US, but they might be able to travel like in the former Soviet Union republics, or they might be able to go to China or those kind of countries. It's funny, like there's a lot of charges against them for years and years. Basically, there is no handle like to get to those. But those are really smart people. Like, I mean, those are people who really have technical skills. The ones who get busted are the ones who go to the cash point in London, for example, right? Like
with the cards.
Yeah, exactly.
And a copper happens to come past and goes, "Excuse me, son, is there a reason why you've got like 500 credit cards sitting in a bag?" No, it's absolutely right. And it's interesting, what you say, because it's like organized crime hasn't really changed in the way that it works for years and years and years. You're always paying somebody off. And if you're operating in one of these countries where there's no extradition treaty, there's no possible way for any other government to get hold of you, then you can buy pretty good security from the local gangs. I mean, let's be honest, in Latin America, there's a lot of cartels who they've got their own personal armies. And if you're a hacker group, if you've got a small group of hackers, you say, "Hey guys, look, quid pro quo, we'll give you some of our profits if you kind of like support us and fund us and protect us as well." Of course they're going to do it. Let's face it. I mean, what was it? The stats for cybercrime 2 years ago, they were in excess of the global drug trade.
The targets are obviously also chosen, and this is a very good analogy, but the targets are also chosen to be in the West, where the chances of getting the ransom paid or extorting money are much more likely to happen. I mean, there have been cases in Latin America where they hacked like the national database of all the passports and all the national IDs and things like this. And then they said, like, well, government, you pay ransom, or we release it on the dark web. And then the government said, no, we don't pay ransom, because they don't care about that kind of stuff. And then they released it. So that's bad for the population, obviously, but also bad for the criminals, because the criminals didn't make any money. Now, on the flip side, if they, install ransomware in a hospital in the United States or in Europe or something like this, chances are it's going to get paid, because there's lives on the line, first and foremost. And there is a lot of also legislation, right? Like when there is like massive data breaches, the actual cost in courts could outweigh the ransom money and things like this. This is why a lot gets paid. I'm not advocating that this is a good thing, but also from the defender side, you have to see it like from both sides. You need to see like how much do I have to pay these bad guys versus how much does it actually cost me if I don't pay it, but then, I have to recover all the systems and then I get legal lawsuits and this and that. I think this is also one of the reasons why we see this massive increase in cybercrime, right? And it's not just ransomware. I think this is also something that the public underestimates many times, that it's not just the ransomware attacks where your screen gets locked and things. It's much more sinister. There's a lot of corporate espionage in there as well, stealing data, competitive advantage, and that links back to that links back to nation states who tend, and I'm not naming one here, but who tend
probably good we don't.
Yeah, but who tend to take ideas from other countries and then rebuild it on the back of it, and then also like the whole online payment systems and things like this, like whether it's PayPal accounts. If you go on the dark web, you go on any of these onion sites, financial markets and stuff. And again, I'm not mentioning them explicitly, but you can pretty much buy any financial service. Oh yeah, here, PayPal accounts, this account, that account, credit card numbers, crypto miners, crypto stealers, you name it. In order for these people to publish those, they have various ways and means to get to this, right? Like, so standard infiltration of a web application, stealing credit card numbers, and that even Google dorking. I mean, this is so bad to say. It's still possible with the right Google dorking. And now with AI, it's even worse with a jailbroken model. You actually get to those specific Excel spreadsheets which someone left on the server. And it's unbelievable to me that this is still happening, but you can actually get good credit card numbers that way, right? Like it's shocking.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, the old techniques haven't gone away. They've just adapted. They've just changed. It's weird because it's like in the early days of my career, hacking was hard because it was hard to learn. You couldn't go to online communities, or there weren't so many at least, where you could go and you could learn how to do the hacking stuff. A lot of it was self-taught. Now there's whole communities you can go to where they'll teach you how to do it. It's a lot easier comparatively to get onto the game of doing hacking, cracking. I prefer the term cracking personally, but there's a lot more resources to teach you how to do it. And then it's just a question of like, do you go legit or do you not go legit? Arguably it's more lucrative to not be legit. Obviously, you run the risk of getting caught, or you run the risk of getting to the point where you can't travel anywhere. Do you think crypto is going to become kind of the de facto currency a lot of these people use? I mean, cash is going the way of the dodo anyway, let's be honest.
So basically, it's definitely going to be continued to be used, like regardless of what kind of legislation you have in place. And then legislation is only per region, right? Like it's simple as that. Like there's even huge differences in terms of financial freedoms between Europe, the UK, and the US. Even in the Western world, there is like it's significant differences. For like, in the US, you have a lot more protection, like Fourth Amendment and unnecessary seizure, I think it's called, and stuff like that like this whole monitoring and surveillance stuff, like as they do it in some places in Europe, it's not possible in the US. So that's the first one. But there's always countries who are not playing along, right? And there's geopolitical issues and things like this. And I mean, look at El Salvador. Like this, El Salvador is probably one of the most liberal countries now when it comes to cryptocurrency with Bukele. And it's legal tender.
Yeah, I was about to say, haven't they adopted it as a form of legal tender? You can just go into a shop and buy your shopping with crypto.
And you have crypto ATMs, and this is very common. Like this is funny, right? Like, so I'm married to a woman from Latin America, and so I get down there quite a lot. And so basically, there's crypto ATMs everywhere, and the crypto ATMs allow you to pay in a certain amount of money, and then you just scan the QR code of your wallet, right? Like where you want to send it, Bitcoin or US dollar coin on the Tron chain and stuff like that. And so these machines in itself have a huge flaw. And the flaw is basically you need KYC for a certain amount. I think it's above $1,000. You need KYC, like with a passport scan or something like this. Well, how people get around this? You just stay under 900 and then you do another transaction. And you know that you can have virtual wallets and virtual wallet IDs. And then basically you can stand there for the whole day and keep putting cash in and laundering it. But you always do only $900 at a time, right? Like instead of doing like 9,000 in one batch. And so it's usually flawed, these things. But you see these all over Latin America. I don't know about Europe too much, right? Like whether you have them, but it's quite common and it works both ways. You can actually also go to these cash points and then get money out, get local currency out from your wallet. So you can withdraw money there as well. So it's definitely going to be used. On the cash side, it's dependent on the region. Once again, like if you look at countries like Mexico, where I believe it's like more than 50% of the population don't even have a bank account. The infrastructure in Mexico is so poor outside the big cities, right? Like inside the big cities, you have like your 5G, 4G network, cellular coverage, a lot of point of service terminals and things like this. If you go outside into rural areas, there is often not even cell signal. Or it's down because of the heat, or it's down because of power outage and all these kind of things. So a lot of countries in Latin America specifically are cash economies, right? In Asia as well, by the way, like if you look at Cambodia and Vietnam and places like that, it's like very, very cash rich. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, that you can pay with card or electronically or Apple ID or whatnot. But if you have countries, like especially in Latin America, where there's a large number of the population who don't even have a bank account, right? Or where the infrastructure service is just not there in many regions, that you need consistent coverage, right? Like in order to run a credit card transaction. And if it's not there, if it's in the mountains, then what do? You pay in cash. This is so different to Europe. In Europe, in the UK, for example, or in Germany or in Sweden, you have this good coverage, and you have like the power supplies don't go out every few hours and things like that, right?
Well,
like
yeah.
so.
I mean, just sorry to cut across you there. I was just thinking, if you are the head of a hacking group, or you're high up in a hacking group, or you've got your hacking group in one of these places, you have more than enough money to put the bleeding infrastructure in to be able to do that and benefit the local community, as well as continue to do what you do with impunity. I mean, let's face it, when you're seeing organizations paying, allegedly 10 million, 20 million, 40 million, 5 million dollars, pounds, euros, whatever, to pay the ransomware so they don't lose their entire business through disclosure or, whatever. Paying a bug bounty is the other one I've heard that governments like to do. They don't pay a ransom, but we'll pay consultancy fees for you to tell us how you did it, kind of thing. Not saying that happens at all or anything.
Yeah.
Before I get a knock on the door from the UK police, but it does allow you to fund anything that you need in these regions. If there is no reliable power, build yourself your own power station, for Christ's sake, or fund another group to be able to do it. Because let's be honest, I mean, a lot of this infrastructure in some of the more riskier places where you'd find the people who are doing certain things, like growing certain types of plants with big bulbs underneath where they can harvest them, have pretty much sorted out most of that infrastructure themselves over the many years that they've been doing that. Yeah. And these are the types of people that, they want to get into this. It's another revenue stream for them.
Totally. Yeah.
We talk about no honor amongst thieves, but the ecosystem is strong. And nowadays you can be part of that ecosystem without ever actually doing anything malicious yourself directly. You could just be a developer helping develop the tools to allow people to do it.
That's the thing. Yeah, exactly. And this blurs the line as well, right? Like, so for example, if you go, like, I know a lot from the hacking community, like the white hat hacking community. So the good guys, they're publishing stuff on GitHub for the good of the greater community, right? Whether that's scraping tools, whether that's bug bounty tools, whether that's pen test tools, AI tools, you name it, but it's there, right? It's really down to what are people doing with it? And a lot of people will download it. And I know a lot of my friends and coworkers and things, they download those and they use them for legitimate purposes as penetration testers, for security audits, for what have you. But at the same time, there will be people sitting in a dark basement in somewhere in North Korea and will be downloading exactly the same tools, but they are then using those tools for malicious purposes. So the tool itself doesn't make it malicious, right? And this is again
usage.
how you, from a perspective, like in the US, for example, the tool possession itself is fine. Right, like, so there's jurisdictions in the world where they say, like, oh, if you hold this specific gadget or this tool, it's illegal. Like, think of jammers, right? Like jamming devices where you block wireless or cell signals and stuff like that. So there's huge different legislation. Some countries say, like, that's fine, you can have your jammer. Right?
Just don't use it.
It's illegal to use it, exactly. But other countries, they already ban the import. Like, I don't know if you followed that story with the Flipper, like the Flipper Zero, which is like this little orange box, which is like this multi-army Swiss knife for radio frequencies, like sub-gigahertz and infrared and Bluetooth and you name it. It is pretty cool. I have one of those. It's super useful for security audits. But can you abuse it? Yeah, of course. You can open garage doors. You can open, you can do malicious things with it. Is it banned? Can you buy it in the United States, for example? Absolutely. Can you use it in your own house? Absolutely. But there's lots of countries who banned these things and said, like, no, because it's outright malicious. Even I wouldn't agree to that. It's not malicious. A gun is not malicious if a police officer has a gun, right? But in the hands of a criminal, it may become malicious, right? This is a whole other aspect of discussion, right? You can really compare it like to firearms, right? Like, so in the United States, the firearms are legitimate. You can have them. It's your Second Amendment right and what have you. That's not the same way Europe sees it, right? Criminals with a gun are dangerous, right? Like, per se. A police officer with a gun is it dangerous or not? Like, it depends how you see it, right? Like in a corrupt government, it probably is, right? Like, so. But it's the same with hacking tools. It's the same with hacking tools, gadgets, software. It makes the user, the user who uses it for malicious purposes, that's the problem. It's not the tool itself. I mean, my laptop is full of these kind of tools, right? Like, because I'm doing this for a living, for ethical hacking and showing companies where the flaws are. And my laptop is loaded with these tools, but that's fine. Like, that's completely cool because I get the signature from the client to actually do that kind of work for them. A criminal with the same laptop could use this for a lot of bad activities.
Yeah. Well, now you said that, of course, the next time you go through an airport in a different country, someone's going to be putting you in a room with a nice big man with a big rubber glove. Who's going to be going through all of your stuff, whether you want him to or not. What you say is absolutely true. And the other thing is, by banning these tools, it prevents us ethical side of the fence from being able to test your infrastructure, your organizations, your government bodies, to be able to protect from that. Totally. So who's right and who's wrong, and how do you prove that somebody's using it? Because let's be honest, there have been more than one ethical hacker over the years who've been arrested or may not have been arrested at things like InfoSec because they've been playing both sides of the fence. Just saying. Because let's face it, you do earn more money on the bad side, but obviously, if you do the crime, you run the risk of doing the time. And God forbid if it looks like somebody's going to be found out in one of the larger hacking groups, they will, as we said before, they'll make sure that you're the scapegoat. All of a sudden, everything will point at you. I find the whole kind of underground really, really fascinating in the way that it works. There's so many nuances to it. It's become its own ecosystem, mirroring the legitimate ecosystem, and has been for many years. It's run very professionally. And
totally.
I think the most ironic thing, really, they spend more on securing themselves than organizations on the legitimate side spend securing themselves.
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is obviously they know the risks because of the kind of activity they do, and they know the flaws. They know this much better. Like a corporate bank deals with banking and deals with transactions and wire transfers and credit cards and that kind of stuff. A criminal organization who breaks into banks I would argue, would probably have a bit more ideas about the latest threats and about the latest exploits and all these kind of things. And then they reapply that knowledge to secure themselves. Yeah, that's totally true. That's 100%. Jim, something we haven't talked about, there is still, and they will always exist. There's also the lone wolves, also these individuals who are just very, very talented and go on the dark side and basically pull all this stuff off themselves. So you read this occasionally in the news, the 15-year-old from somewhere in the UK or somewhere in the US who hacked into NASA systems or who hacked into the US government and things like that. And sometimes those are just very, very talented, small individuals, and they just hack into stuff, right? It's not always necessarily like an organized crime group. We see this trend, as we discussed in this podcast, but a lot of them are also like individuals who are just extremely talented about things, and they sit there with a 10-year-old laptop, and
we had one of them, and all he did was he was hacking the US government to find out information about UFOs. He eventually, obviously, got caught, but he spent most of his time sitting in his girlfriend's aunt's house smoking illicit substances and trying to find UFO information on UFOs. And there was a big extradition treaty, and like the government got involved and the prime minister got involved. Prime minister at the time got involved. But you're absolutely right, and I think. One thing I just kind of want to do before we come to an end, this is a fascinating conversation, and no doubt we'll be having a lot more of these over time, but the rivalries between groups, how bad actually is it? There's alliances that break down, alliances that are pretty strong, just people who naturally hate one another. We saw some of that when obviously the Ukraine and Russia incident, that's still going on, sort of kicked off, and that's where the Conti files were allegedly leaked. You had a group of one side who are very unhappy what was happening to their country, just say, right, screw this, and then grabbed hold of all of the chat logs and all as much information as they could, got out, and then just chucked it out on the web for everybody to see because they were so upset. Is there a lot of rivalry between these groups, or is there a lot of collusion, or is there just some really guarded kind of, how does it work?
There is a lot of but it's not geopolitics. So usually the fights between these groups and the disagreements between these groups are based purely on competitiveness, right? Not on geopolitics. Like, this is rare. Like, if you go into these forums and stuff like that and do your research, you will find people from country A and country B, which are totally not aligned politically, but they're in the same organization, because it's all about making money, right? Like, and I think this is the same kind of stuff we see with the illicit substances, that people who would normally, who very different countries, who have very different perspectives, who have very different political agendas, but citizens of these countries work together because it's a criminal venture, right? And it doesn't really matter. It's like, take Google, for example. You have people from all kinds of places all over the world, all kinds of nationalities working in Google, right? And it doesn't matter, like, the guy from the US, the guy from the UK, the guy from Russia, the guy from China, they work next to each other, right? And they're in the same team and they develop an app, right? And it's pretty much the same thing, but there is these fights between the groups, right? And you can see this, for example, don't publish this. You idiot, why have you put this new exploit against that banking logging? Why have you put it here? The others will see it. Like, keep this to ourselves and things. So there's obviously a secret trade source. They won't use X, like the bug bounty community, and would say like, hey, I found this great new vulnerability, and by the way, it's not fixed yet. I have reported it to the bug bounty. They don't do stuff like that, right? Like, because they want to keep those kind of things. But are there fights? Absolutely. And there is different groups, and then there is state-sponsored groups which have, some links to governments, and that's worldwide, right? Like, it's one thing I really would like to stress is, it's always from a Western perspective, it's always finger pointed at one direction. It's their bad and their government is bad and this and that. No, this happens everywhere. It happens everywhere, maybe not at that scale, but there is, Africa, for example, Latin America, for example, it's exactly the same thing. It's not on a level as much as, for example, certain countries in Asia, because they have, first of all, they have a higher population, they have a higher cyber awareness and things like this. But the principle is the same thing, right? The principle in Africa or the principle in Latin America is the same thing. Also, don't underestimate Europe. In Europe, particularly Eastern Europe, we have like significant hacking capabilities, both on the white hat as well as on the black hat side. And that's totally like in the media, everyone always talks about, oh yeah, cyber capabilities. That's the US, that's India, that's Israel, that's Russia, that's China, that's the UK. Like something like that, right? Like this is like from an offensive cyber perspective. It's totally not true. Turkey is really good, for example. Like Turkey has both on the black hat and the white hat has really good capability. So has Romania. So has Bulgaria, for example. Right? There's certain countries in Latin America who have a really strong base, like Argentina, Chile, Colombia. So those are all things not to be underestimated. It's a global thing. It's not just confined to certain regions. You always read like, oh, ransomware attack and the bad North Koreans have done this and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not advocating for them, right? But my point simply is that this happens everywhere. And the more you research into this topic, you will actually find evidence that this is a global thing and not just limited to a few jurisdictions or countries.
I have a question to end with.
Sure.
And we do have to end with it because we could talk about this for hours, and I know we have in the past. Is it going to get worse?
100%.
And if so, are we just looking at the tip of the iceberg at the moment to how bad it's actually going to be? I mean, let's face it. Once you have shadow AI, for instance, where there's a lot less guardrails, there's a lot less kind of, that's going to compound the ability of a lot of people who, are talented anyway, let alone when they can start doing it at scale and utilizing kind of techniques to speed up the level of attacks. And are we looking at a pretty difficult situation as InfoSec professionals on the light side of the force, as I like to take it? Do we have our work cut out?
It's an arms race, right? So I don't think...
we're losing.
Yeah. I mean, yes and no. So, I see both sides of the fence. I see defensive as well as offensive. Definitely, it is going to get worse because attacks can be pulled off much easier with AI. And if you only need to go to Hugging Face and download jailbroken models and stuff like that, even under the pretext, you go to any frontier AI model, under the pretext of doing a penetration test or an ethical assessment, it will write you malware code right there and then. So does Claude Code, Cursor CLI, all these coding agents, right? Like you have like the latest one, Google Anti-Gravity. It's never been as easy to develop malicious code and attacks as it is today. That's a fact. However, the defensive side is also using the same tooling to defend also with AI. I mean, it's both sides leveraging AI. The problem you really can see is that the enhancement in AI is mainly done in certain countries. So there's China, the US, UK, like where people are actively deploying stuff and are actively engaging AI right now. However, there's a lot of countries which are not that cyber aware or are very behind. And again, I use Latin America as an example. Some of them are more advanced than others. However, the hackers are the first ones who will leverage AI as an attack method, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have countries which are not very sophisticated on the defenses already, let alone AI defenses. And you will see a lot more moving forward. You will see a lot more incidents, especially in those countries which do not have the same defense level like the Western world. right? And because the hackers are predominantly looking at the weakest targets. Like, does it make sense to hack into the most sophisticated bank in the United States, or do I rather target a mid-sized bank in Mexico where I already know that they had previous security vulnerabilities, right? Like say I'm a Chinese hacker or a North Korean hacker, and now I'm looking at, do I try to attack this specific bank in the US, or do I go after the mid-sized bank in Mexico or in Guatemala or in El Salvador or Nicaragua or any of those countries where I already know that they don't have the cyber capability to defend like the US would,
I mean, this is frightening because it actually just made me think, a lot of the AI defenses that are going to be being brought out, and, it depends on how much Kool-Aid you drink, whether or not a lot of them have got AI at the moment. It's always a good marketing thing, I think, at the moment, but AI really isn't quite there yet. But when it is, and it won't take long, and let's face it, every time somebody turns around and goes, no, it's going to be years away, boom, it gets done about 6 months later or a year later. Small and medium-sized businesses aren't going to be able to afford that kind of level of protection. A lot of the first firms that really bring out good, solid AI defensive capability are going to price it so high, it's going to be out of reach. And you're going to have a whole raft of businesses who are going to get hit by a wave of AI-enabled malicious activity. But they can't afford to buy the defensive capability comparatively. You mentioned we're worried about less kind of like technologically aware countries, but it also goes into the industries as well. People like Google and Amazon and Uber and all the big players in the game can afford to purchase this new kind of AI defensive capability as it's come out. Half of them are probably already developing it or invested into companies that are doing it anyway. But Dave and Joe's kind of like, insurance company or Phil's, e-tailer selling widgets and gadgets, they can't afford that stuff. Christ, they can barely afford an endpoint security now, let alone anything to really protect them from the really bad area. So I do fear, and you've made some really great points that have made me think. I'm not just fearing where we are going as protecting larger businesses. I'm wondering about the backbone of most economies, which is small and medium-sized businesses.
Yeah,
they're not going to be able to deal with it. But I could see where this is going, and we could launch into another hour's worth of conversation, but our time is short. Martin, you are by far one of the best offensive, ethical hackers I've ever come across. So if any of you out there ever want to get in touch with Martin, please feel free to. He's a wealth of knowledge. He is truly fantastic at what he does and has some great insight. And Martin, thank you so much. We're definitely going to get you back. Appreciate it. And I'm going to drag in a few more people as well who might be able to add additional insights, who may or may not have played on the bad side in the past and have seen the light at some point. But thank you ever so much. And to all of you out there watching, good percentage of you still are not subscribed. I know it's really tough to hit the subscribe button, but please, for us, to allow us to get out there, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the notification button. It all helps us with the algorithm. We continue to add additional content, all over the place with all kinds of different things, be it burnout, be it how the bad guys work, how the good guys work, how to protect businesses of large international types and small and medium sizes. And we're always looking to add more content. So if there is anything you want us to talk about, DM us. There's plenty of ways you can get through to us, and we'll line up the relevant guests. And if it's something about the bad guys or offensive security, you can bet your bottom dollar we'll get Martin back down in here. Thank you ever so much, and we'll see you again soon.